Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you are joining us. I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you for joining this session of the AIIL webinars. Today's session is to discuss one of the most important problem of contemporary international law, especially climate change. Climate change is a challenge for different countries from different regions of the world. And today we have decided to approach it from a variety of perspectives. Instead of looking at it just from the one perspective, we want to see what are the perspectives, the views from Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And for this purpose, we have brought together a stellar panel, and I really, really mean it, a stellar panel from 3 different continents. Of course, it means that one of us is joining us at 11 p.m. in the night, and that shows you how difficult it can be to get all the perspective on the table. So today we really have 3 stellar scholars on climate change and international law. The first one that I will introduce to you is Professor Mutoy Mubiala. Professor Mutoy Mubiala is Associate Professor of International Human Rights Law at the University of Kinshasa in Democratic Republic of Congo. He has extensive experience in several areas of international law, including international environmental law, has worked for a number of years with UNITA, and has published 5 books. The second speaker today is Professor Quinn Tianbao, and Professor Quinn Tianbao is a Law Chair Professor of Law and serves as the Director of the Research Institute of Environmental Law. He is Associate Dean for Research and International Affiliation for the School of Law, Deputy Director of the Research Center of the Supreme Court of China on environmental related cases. He has written a number of books, more than 100 articles in the field of environmental law and climate change. And his recent publication includes the Research Handbook on Chinese Environmental Law, published with Routledge in 2015. And the last speaker is Mrs. Maria Antonia Tigre from Brazil. And Mrs. Maria Antonia Tigre is Global Climate Litigation Fellow at the Sabin Center for Climate Change Law at Columbia Law School and Director of Latin America for the Global Network for the Study of Human Rights and the Environment. Among her distinguished achievement, I would like just to single out that she wrote her first book on regional cooperation in Amazonia, a comparative environmental law analysis that was published in 2017. She is also the author of Gaps, and I'm quoting the title, Gaps in International Environmental Law Toward a Global Pact for the Environment, a travaux préparatoire for a new agreement, or at least potentially, on environmental principle. So without further ado, I would just give you some key in-house rules as far as the organization of the webinar is concerned. The webinar will primarily be led by the speakers. We want the time to be really about them, and we want them to share their perspective on this topical issue that is climate change nowadays. So after this introduction, I will give the floor to Professor Mutoy Mubiala, and then after Professor Mubiala's presentation, we will move to Professor Tianbao King, and finally to Mrs. Maria Antonia Tigre. I will not be intervening anymore. I will not be intervening anymore because we really want the webinar to be a conversation between these 3 perspectives from 3 different continents. So without any further words, let me just give the floor to Professor Mutoy Mubiala, who will be talking about African regionalist climate change and the prevention of mass deforestation in the Congo basin. Professor Mutoy Mubiala, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mamadou, for your introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Depending on your location, maybe somewhere it is too early, but in Kinshasa we are already in the afternoon. I think that the title of my communication or my introduction could be can be provoking, because we know that climate change is something very global. It is something very universal. It is very difficult to say to people that we can also have regionalism in this field. But I think that we'll see during the development. I will share with you that there have been some efforts in Africa, in addition to its participation to global instruments, to ensure that there are also some efforts to be done at the continental level, taking into account the principle of, common but differentiated responsibilities, because we have also responsibilities vis-à-vis climate change as developed countries, even though Africa is the less contributor to the climate change, but is the most vulnerable continent regarding this challenge. Now, as you know, at the Rio Conference on Environment and Development in 1992, the United Nations adopted three main instruments: the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, but also the Convention on Biological Diversity, as well as the Declaration on the Principle of Forest Management. As far as Africa is concerned, most of the African states signed and ratified these conventions, but they have also taken initiatives at the regional level to adopt regional instruments in order to complement these global instruments. While at the regional level, at the global level, they are also advocating for the implementation of legal commitments taken by developed countries, especially with regard to the funding and technology transfer in the framework of the mitigations and adaptations strategies adopted at the universal level, especially within the COPs, the process of the COP, the conference of the parties to the UNCC. At the regional level, they have adopted several instruments which conclude to the implementation of response to climate change, but with global impact. The first instrument adopted in the context of the African continent is the revised African Convention of Maputo, adopted in 2003. This convention is relating to the conservation of nature and natural resources. This is very important because, as you know, there are linkages, there are close links between climate change and the degradation of natural resources, and also the mass deforestation. There is a link. One of the main causes of climate change is mass deforestation. That's why we see that many states in Africa have taken the responsibility to ensure that at least we can prevent these mass deforestation in order to contribute, to positively contribute to the fight against climate change, to curb or, to address this global issue. And the second instrument is the Yaoundé Declaration, adopted by Central African states in the context of the Economic Community of African States, ECAS, in 1999. It's about the conservation of the rainforests in Central Africa. As you know, the Congo Basin is the second, reservoir, in the world after the Amazon, regarding the protection of forests. And the third instrument is directly linked to the field of climate change, because, as you know, in 2016, in the margins of the conference, the COP of Marrakech in Morocco, the African Union established 3 commissions, climate commissions, regional commissions. The first one deals with the Sahel region, which is facing, the Sahel region face, a very hot seasons, and there is a risk, of deforestation. There is no forest there, but they are well exposed, facing the phenomenon of, desertification. And there was also a second commission, climate commission, created by the African Union. This is about the island countries. And the third one is about the Congo Basin. As I told you, the Congo Basin is a very reservoir of forest and biological diversity, which can contribute to address the issue of, or the challenge of, climate change at the global level. They adopted in 2018 the Protocol of Brazzaville, establishing this climate commission. It is a legal instrument, a binding instrument, signed and ratified by at least 15 countries of Central Africa, which are, for some of them, riparian to the Congo Basin river. The features of all these instruments are the following. First of all, there is, a reference to human and people rights, because the deforestation is among is impact, negative impact, the destructions of livelihood of people living in the forest, and most of the people are indigenous people, and therefore when they have adopted these instruments, regional instruments, they have put an emphasis or special attention to the situation of people living there, including other people, not only indigenous people, but the accent, the emphasis is put on the human dimension of the protection against deforestation. And the second, these instruments also, aimed to promote, the conservation of nature, and also to promote a sustainable management or use of the resources. This is very important, taking into account of the impact of the management of resources on the climate change, the progress made by climate change. That's very important. And also, the third element is the promotion of the rights of people to participate in the decision-making process regarding, the use of these resources. And I think that African states have adopted a people-centered approach to international law, relating to climate change. If you, examine the three instruments I have mentioned in my expose, and they didn't limit themselves to, to put, to adopt a people-centered approach to fight against climate change through the prevention of mass deforestation. They have also advocated for the adoption of this human dimension during the last COP. If you remember, in Glasgow, the state representing more than 19% of countries possessing forests have adopted a non-binding declaration, but a very authoritative instrument on the forests, on the conservation of forests, but also on the use of land. And if you read the Glasgow Declaration, you will see that there is at least three provisions which are related to, the situation of indigenous people. This is one of the influences of Africa during the process, the COP of Glasgow, because they came with, this feature from the continent in order to influence, universal approach. And I am sure that the Glasgow Declaration includes the African perspective on climate change, in including, the human dimension and the African-centered people approach to a global issue. I think that we can say that there is an emerging African regionalism in the field of climate change, which is not linked directly to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, but which is very, very close to this instrument, because those instruments I have reviewed here are covering matters which are very relevant to the fight against climate change at the global level. I think that with this, we can conclude that Africa, with its instruments dealing with the fight against mass deforestation, has been contributing to the climate change regime at the global level. That's why I can also argue that regionalism is relevant to address global issues, including and especially climate change. I stop there, and we will maybe, exchange further during the discussion. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
I now give the floor to Professor Tianbao King, who will discuss.
Okay, thank you very much. So I have a small request. I have a presentation to share with all of you. But I cannot share through. Someone have already occupied the screen. Can you deal with, or? Excuse me? Okay, now it's fine, yeah. Joe, can you see it? That's great, yeah. Okay, thank you very much. I'm very glad to be a speaker tonight on behalf of the Asia. Actually, I think I cannot represent the whole continent, Asia, because Asia is so big and have so many different countries, maybe have different opinions about the climate change. So tonight I will share my understanding, especially my recent observations on international law and climate change after the Glasgow conference, climate conference in Scotland, especially from the academic perspective. Yeah. So my first point is about the CBDR, is common but differentiated responsibility. So how to interpret and how to apply the CBDR on the new context, in the new context. So when we check the text of UNFCCC and Paris Agreement and the new Glasgow Climate Pact, we will find that there are some slight different. So according to the Article 3.1 of UNFCCC, the text says, here you can see that in according with their common but differentiated responsibilities and the respective capabilities. Then during the Paris conference and in the final Paris Agreement, the Article 2.2, they use the term as the agreement will implement to reflect the equity and the principle of common but differentiated responsibility and respective capabilities. So these two terms, these two phrases are the same with this UNFCCC, but they also added a new one in the light of different national circumstances. Then we found that in the final text of the Glasgow climate, so the first part, paragraph 4, signs and urgencies, recalls Article 2 of Paris Agreement, and in Paris, in section 5, paragraph 27, the title is mitigation. It also repeats the Paris Agreement Article 2, Article 2, paragraph 2. So we could find that the new understanding about the CBDR should be, it is not alone about the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, but also with respective capability and the different national circumstances. So it is, so according to my understanding, so this the rationale of the changes of the text is firstly that the focus is changed from the historical responsibility to historical responsibility combining with respective capabilities and the different national circumstances. Second, we can find that maybe we can conclude that the rationale behind that is originally we regarded the CBDR as kind of a reflection of polluter pays principle, because you especially the developed countries, you polluted the earth, so you should pay the cost. But the new idea is to change it from this, change it to the beneficiary pays principle. So in some way, the developed countries should is polluter and also beneficiary because of the climate change, or because of several other issues related to climate change. So this is my first impression about this rationale of the CBDR. So how to allocate the responsibilities of this combat or adapt to the climate change? So originally we can say it's nothing and all. So the Annex 1 countries, they have the emission reduction obligations. This is compulsory reduction obligations. But the non-active next one countries have no obligations. But from Paris agreements to the Glasgow Pact, we could find the change. So the developing countries is increasingly undertaking the some kind of obligations. For example, from this absolute reduction to kind of intensity reduction, which is also called a relative reduction, like the China, India, and several other developing countries. And it is not nothing or all, it's kind of less and more. This is the developed countries should take more responsibility, but comparatively, the developing countries have less responsibility. And the developed countries should take the responsibility earlier, and the developing countries take a little bit later. Or we can allocate the responsibility in different sectors. Maybe some for developed countries, they should take almost all important sectors to reduce the emissions. But for developing countries, not so many sectors. So we can change. You can find the change of this allocation of the responsibilities of the CBDRs according to the new development of international climate law, especially in the Glasgow Climate Pact. Yeah. It's the first point I want to mention. You can see from this this one is this always causes the equity issues. So this is a kind of cumulative emission per capita. So you can see the big difference of the figures, like Canada, the US, Australia, even Russia is top 4. But for the China and India, it's still very low according to the statistics by carbon brief of the organizations. Second is my second observation of mine is the increasing obligation of the soft law. So we can see that according to the 1992 UNFCCC, it's more like a soft law because they have a lot of political declarations and vague principles. But when we look at the text of the Kyoto Protocol, we can find it's more like a hard law. It is the first time in the history of international law to impose the quantitative legal obligations on nations. It's kind of a compulsory reduction obligations. But we also know that the result, the effectiveness of the Kyoto Protocol, the hard law is not so good. So we can see the agreements in Paris. Agreement in Paris is kind of a coexistence of hard law and soft law. Yeah. So the new trade for the soft law issues, soft law instrument has been increasingly applied in international climate law. So we can see kind of situations. We found the hard law or hard in obligation of conduct, but soft, more soft the obligation of the result. For example, we know this kind of intended nationally determined contributions, the NDCs. So this kind of NDCs is determined by the countries themselves. So this kind of obligation is kind of a softer obligation. But when you set out your NDCs, you must meet the requirement set by yourself. So this is kind of a hard law in we can say it's the obligation of conduct. So this is similarly, so we can see the situations more hard or harder in procedural obligations in international climate change law and a softer instrument in substantial obligations. This is the examples that the NDC is a softer result, and also kind of soft in substantial obligations. But from Kyoto Protocol to Paris Agreement to the Glasgow Pact, we can say so-called as a monetary reporting verification requirement. So this is kind of a procedure obligations. Even the global stock take is also kind of a procedure obligations. This is very hard. So the situation is that when we talk about the obligations of emission reduction, we need kind of hard procedure obligations. But how about when we talk about the obligations for financial assistance and technological transfer? Do we need a similar hard procedure obligations like a monetary reporting and verification from the developed countries to the developing countries to provide the financial assistance and to transfer the technology in the similar procedure obligation? So we did not say very good, but we hope maybe in future this kind of considerations between the obligations of a reduction through the MRV with the obligations of financial and technological assistance with MRV. Okay. So this is Kato to show in this COP26 in Glasgow. So last one is the coordination between the Paris Agreement with the WTO regimes, especially the CBAM, the carbon border adjust measures or mechanisms. For example, for China or Asian countries, China and Korea, they will export the steel products to the EU. The purpose of the CBAM is CBAM is try to combat the so-called carbon leakage. So when we talk about the carbon leakage, this kind of mechanism package on the production countries. So I very interestingly, I found a report about 15 years ago. It's kind of a Norwegian consumption, Chinese pollution. This is a report by a NGO. It's an example how OECD countries impose generous CO2 emissions in developed countries. So from this picture, you can also see the so-called the hiding CO2 in the EU trade. So this is the different, these directions. So how the pollutions, although pollution is emissions of CO2 were imported to European countries, but originally generated in developing countries like China, India, South Africa, Brazil, and other countries. So this is a very interesting situation. When we talk about the carbon leakage, when we talk about the CBAM, we used to deal with to offset the linkage situation. The presumption is that the production country should take responsibilities. The production country should undertake the burden. But how about the consumption countries? Yeah. So the suggestion from this report is about the findings and suggestions from this report is that on average, every Norwegian causes emissions of 1.5 tons of CO2 in China. But this is the number of 2006. I did not find some new finding results. So Norwegian consumption is leading to more than 2 million tons of annual CO2 emissions from coal-fired power plants in China. Oh, that's not the most important. The most important, how to deal with that. So the suggestion by this report mentioned that Norway should encourage all developed countries to estimate their CO2 footprints in developing countries, and that cost and annually plays an equal amount. For example, for year of 2006, very roughly it's about 51 billion euro in mechanisms able to add developing a low carbon and high efficient technology in these countries. So that means we have only one Earth. So the combat the climate situation, climate change is a global effort. It's kind of a global collaboration. We cannot rely on any single country or single country groups, no matter developed countries or developed countries. But the precondition is that the allocation, equally allocation of the responsibilities and the resources and the capacities. So that's my very short observations with my colleagues and the audience. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Quinn, for your presentation, your excellent presentation. I will now give the floor to Mrs. Maria Antonia Tigre.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a really interesting discussion so far, and I really like this approach of having the regions in the Global South being discussed sort of jointly to understand a little bit more about this massive problem of climate change that we have all around, and especially after COP26, and sort of doing an overview of everything that happened. So I'm here today to present some perspectives from Latin America. I'm from Brazil originally. I live in New York, but obviously still have a very strong relationship with the region. And I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the commitments that some of the countries in Latin America have announced during COP26, as well as some of the perspectives on the updated nationally determined contributions, the NDCs that were announced prior to COP26 as well. So just to give a little bit of context, Latin America and the Caribbean contribute about 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions to climate change in general. And while countries have taken steps to address climate change through a series of measures, such as forest protection and energy transition, the region's emissions are still steadily growing. And although energy accounts for a large share of emissions at a global level, the primary source of emissions in Latin America and the Caribbean actually come from land use change in forestry and agriculture, as the region has a green energy generation matrix overall. So it's sort of a different perspective than most of the other regions in the world. The region is also highly vulnerable to increasing climate variability and extremes due to climate change, especially in coastal cities threatened by sea level rise. And in addition, hurricanes are increasingly common in Central America, and climate change could really push millions into extreme poverty because of disasters. So most countries in the regions are very committed to the Paris Agreement. They have set out ambitious climate change plans to move to greener carbon neutral economies and build resilience to adapt to impacts of climate change. The submission of updated NDCs brings an opportunity for all countries to increase ambition and show progress in other areas such as adaptation, contributing to sustainable development, participation, and inclusiveness in transparent systems to track progress. However, as we all know, the 2021 NDC synthesis report findings show that although individual countries have mainly increased mitigation targets, overall it falls short of what science recommends to keep the global temperature rises to 1.5 degrees. An anticipated 16% increase in global greenhouse gas emissions in 2030 compared to 2010 may lead to a temperature rise of about 2.7 degrees Celsius by the end of this century. So given this scenario, what have countries in Latin America committed to before COP26, and what contributions and commitments came out of COP26 to further contribute to emissions reductions? So most countries in the region have increased their mitigation targets in their latest NDCs making progress in climate ambition. For example, Chile moved from intensity to absolute targets. If all of the measures are actually implemented, it could peak emissions in 2023, becoming a front runner on climate action. Peru also increased its percentage reduction. Jamaica and Colombia have approximately doubled previous NDC commitments. And after a few NDCs in the region that the Climate Action Tracker has analyzed, Costa Rica remains the most ambitious, is really one of the big examples at a global level. And one of the few countries to actually align to a 2 degrees Celsius goal. The WWF has also categorized 5 Latin American countries as sort of they call it the NDCs we want. So that includes Colombia, Suriname, Dominican Republic, Panama, and Costa Rica. Argentina, Chile, Ecuador, and Jamaica still have a short way to go. But after this analysis, Argentina actually announced at COP26 that a 2% improvement on its mitigation targets. So Chile and Costa Rica have committed to carbon neutrality by 2050, but still so far, Costa Rica is the only Latin American country that have actually prepared a decarbonization strategy. Colombia just announced a decarbonization strategy at COP26 and to reach carbon neutrality by 2050 as well. And Peru mentioned that a similar national strategy is currently being developed. Despite all of this progress, which is not exactly everything that we need, but it's progress, there are 2 very notable exceptions to this progression in the national mitigation targets, which is Brazil and Mexico. So both countries have not raised ambition compared to the earlier NDCs, and they changed their methodologies for accounting for emissions so that they could actually meet the targets while also emitting more carbon. So there was a regression really from both countries, and that has led to climate litigation, as I will explain a little later on. So moving on to some of the categories that were announced of commitments. So the first one being deforestation. Obviously, it has said here already that forest, as a crucial ally in the fight against climate change, especially from Latin America, from some other regions in the world as well. It's still, obviously this critical climate buffer is quickly disappearing, and it's been said over and over again that we need to do something about it. Data really shows that deforestation rates keep rising in Brazil specifically. There was really right after COP26 ended, actually, Brazil released some of the data that said that deforestation rates have been the worst in 15 years. And really deforestation contributes to about a quarter of global greenhouse gas emissions. So, I think everyone here is probably aware that at COP26, countries signed the Glasgow Leaders Declaration on Forests and Land Use to halt and reverse forest loss and land degradation by 2030. So this commitment is backed by public funds for forest conservation and a global roadmap to make 75% of forest commodity supply chains sustainable. So the United Nations mentioned that signatories represent 90% of the world's forests. So they're responsible for sequestering around 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions released from fossil fuels each year. So signatories include a bunch of notable countries from Latin America, including Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, Ecuador, the list goes on and on, Mexico. But notably, there are a couple of countries that actually shared the Amazon rainforest as well, Bolivia, Venezuela, and French Guiana, that have not signed the agreement yet. So while they have an impressive range of signatories from forest-rich countries, I think, we have to mention that something similar has been attempted before. So in 2014, countries several of the same countries signed the New York Declaration on Forests, vowing to halve deforestation by 2020 and end it altogether by 2030. Obviously, this hasn't happened. There was a progress report published last year that found that countries failed to meet the first goal and were absolutely off track to meet the second. So there's sort of a general disbelief that countries will actually commit to this time, but there are a couple of significant differences between the two documents. So in the Glasgow one, governments, banks, and philanthropies have actually pledged to contribute 19 billion to help end deforestation. And of this, there's a 1.7 billion that is destined for indigenous groups. Actually, they're custodians of 36% of the world's intact forest landscapes. And the other funds will go to initiatives such as deforestation, free soy and cattle projects, and direct payments for countries that prove they can reduce forest loss. So, and finally, the last point is that coalitions of governments and multinational agricultural companies vow to promote sustainability and preserve and enforce preservation in commodity supply chains. So they'll present, some of the major firms will present their plans next year at COP next year in Egypt. So hopefully we'll see something different this time. The other thing that I wanted to mention was the Methane Pledge. So that has been led by the United States and the European Union to reduce global methane emissions to reach the 1.5 target. More than 100 states have signed this pledge, and the goal is to reduce methane emissions by 30% by 2030. It's also being used for guidance in preventing over 20 million tons of crop losses, in part by methane as well. So methane is significantly worse for the environment than carbon dioxide, as it is 85 times more potent in global warming, despite being short-lived in the atmosphere. 60% of the world's methane emissions are produced by human activities, which are responsible for 25% of current global warming. And cattle ranching is a primary source of methane emissions. Cattle ranching is a significant source of income in Latin America and the Caribbean, and accounts for much of the greenhouse gas emissions in the region. And it's actually sort of double the problem, because obviously, you have the emissions from cattle ranching itself, but also there's usually sort of forest clearing so that you can make room for the cattle. So you also have emissions from that too. But obviously central to the success of these measures are financial subsidies and grants to the agricultural sector to provide incentives to reduce methane emissions. So I just wanted to conclude, mention these actually three climate litigation cases that came out of the regression in the NDC commitments from Brazil and Mexico. So like I said, there were these two, the accounting methodology that was changed that actually led them, both countries, to increase emission and still meet their targets. And that has led to two cases in Brazil. The first one was filed a couple of months ago by 6 youth plaintiffs, and questioning this accounting methodology that was used. And there was a lower court that preliminarily found that the NDC could not be considered less ambitious because it includes a carbon neutrality target. The decision has been appealed. So, we'll see what's going to happen with this one. But then right prior to COP, in the weeks leading up to COP, there was another case that was filed by a Brazilian network of 70 civil society organizations called Observatório do Clima. They filed a class action at the Federal Court of Amazonas against the Environmental Ministry and the Brazilian government. And the petition questions the updated NDCs, but in the context of Brazil's national policy on climate change. So, it sort of compares the commitments that were made, because of the Paris Agreement at the national legislation, and then the executive plans that were announced. And a similar case was brought up in, so this case is still pending, it's very new. So in March 2021, Greenpeace filed a similar proceeding in Mexico, questioning the NDC, and in September, the court decided to suspend Mexico's 2020 NDC, considering it to be regressive, and sort of they suspended its effects. So the 2015 commitments are still, you know, it's the one that's valid for now. So it's still to be decided whether that's going to be appealed or what's going to happen. So all right, I think that's it for me from now, and I'm looking forward to the discussion afterwards.
Thank you very much, Maria Antonia, for this excellent presentation and for showing us all the developments that are taking place in Latin America. So now that our three speakers have spoken, now we want to see if there are any comments that they want to make on each other presentation. So you really have the floor. As we said, we want it to be a free discussion among the three of you. Yeah. Or do you want me to come up with some questions? Is that easier? Okay, let me start with the simplest one. So, is it possible for the three continents to come with a single climate strategy in order to be a driving force in the negotiations? Let's start with that one. It's provocative, but it's meant to start the conversation.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it's not an easy question for sure. I think I can start. So maybe I'll just say that I think politically at this moment, it's very hard for some of the countries in Latin America to engage in any type of cooperation. I've been studying and writing about cooperation even within the countries that share the Amazon rainforest for years. And it's very disappointing, to be honest, because it's, you know, there's always one country or the other that that has a government that's very nationalistic and against any type of cooperation. So that always sort of hinders any type of measure that could expand beyond the protection at the national level. So yeah, I don't know what the other regions are think about that.
Professor Tianbao Queen.
Yes, so cooperation among different countries, among different continents is very necessary, but also very difficult because you know, this different countries have a different national situation and national circumstance. Each different continent has similar situation. So when we talk about the cooperation, so it depends on what kind of cooperation, what kind of level of cooperation, what kind of a scope of cooperation. So if only limited to negotiation, it might be difficult because we have already the G77 plus China. So it includes almost all developing countries already. So I think including the countries from the Asia, Africa, and the Latin America. So it's already some kind of mechanism for them. But it's only kind of coordination of political positions. If we regards to the detailed fields or specific areas, they need more, I mean, concrete strategies for cooperation.
Professor Mubiala. Professor Mubiala, we can't hear you. You have the floor. We can't hear you. switch on your microphone.
Sorry, could you repeat the question, please?
The question was a provocative one, and it was whether it was possible to envision a cooperation between the three continents in order to be the driving force for climate negotiations.
Yes, I think that the cooperation is possible because I think that normally the three regions, you know, are in a group. They are in a group, you know, opposing to the group of developed countries because you know that if you take the expose done by Professor Kin, you will see that if you take the list of these people, these countries contributing to the, you know, the COD, you know, emissions, you will see that most of them are developed countries and not developing countries. And I note that there is a kind of de facto, you know, coalition between developing countries now. How they can, you know, advocate their positions with their position, or how they can influence things. I think that we are increasingly, you know, going in a north-south debate on climate change. And that said, it is very important to formalize maybe this coalition in order to ensure that things can move, you know, in the right direction from them, for them, especially with regard to the, you know, you know, an equitable, you know, implementation of the principle of common but differentiated, you know, responsibilities. It's very important that to have this north-south perspective in order to ensure that things, you know, responsibilities are equitable, equally, but also a kind of climate, you know, climate justice. That's the right word, you know, to illustrate the current debate, north-south debate on the climate change. There's a room for cooperation between the three regions.
Thank you very much. And here I want to take on one of the questions that we got on the in the chat, and it follows on what you just mentioned, which is that there is room for cooperation, but we have to be aware of every country own circumstances, which may make cooperation difficult, even with neighboring countries sharing an ecosystem. But here, the question is whether academics should not do away with the politics and tell us how we can prevent further damage of already ravaging climate change effect. So this is a kind of conversation that you often hear from the younger generation, which is saying that all these politics and all these national circumstances are taking us to the grave. Why not stop the politics and come up with a solution that will help us reverse climate change and ensure our future? What are your comments on this? So should I?
No comment from my side.
Okay. Okay. Maria Antonia.
I think the rise in climate litigation is a response to that. Yeah. It is a response to that lack of action. So there are several cases popping up everywhere. Lots of them coming from youth, from children, and from youth plaintiffs who are very dissatisfied with the way that things are handled at a political level and trying to make a difference through the courts. And the courts have been very responsive to that, which is, I think it's really great news, even if sometimes the result is not exactly what was needed. There's several advancements in terms of the legal recognition of that international legal framework of climate change, and especially as it relates to human rights that's being recognized by courts worldwide.
Professor Tianbao?
Yeah, I agree with my colleague Maria from Brazil. So what the topic tonight actually is about international law and climate change.
Yeah.
So sometimes you cannot very easily to distinct international law and international politics. Yeah. So, and also, international law is also kind of instrument to combat climate change. So when we talk about that we should take concrete actions to combat climate change, it's not only the energy efficiency, or the plant trees, or this kind of activities. So international law is also kind of a reaction. It's also kind of efforts for the global community to deal with the climate change. So a fair, equity, a fair and equitable arrangement of international law on climate change is very important for the whole Earth, for all the countries to take a cooperative way to deal with the climate change. Of course, this is at the international level or global level. At the national level, actually, according to my understanding, it's at least China, or Brazil, or South Africa, and other countries, they have their own actions already through the legal ways, from the administrative actions, or the technical actions, or economic incentives, all kinds of actions. So law is one part of them. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you again. Thank you very much. And I will continue again in the same line of thought, because we have a question on CBAM. So the cross-border carbon border adjustment measures. How would it work in practice? And perhaps do the different regions have specific views on how it will work on practice? Yeah, so Professor Quinn, because you are the one who really insisted on this point. So,
yes. So I just mentioned that the possible conflicts between the CBAM and the WTO agreements. Yeah. So this, the CBAM is a typical trade measure. It's a typical trade measure, no matter the title or the name of them. So that's definitely will cause the compatibility of these measures with the WTO agreements. Yeah. But it's of course it has kind of legitimacy. Yeah. So we use kind of CBAM to push more countries to take their due responsibilities to combat the climate change. Yeah. So my question is, first is, if the CBAM is the carbon border adjustment mechanism is the best solution. Second, is the most cost-effective measures. Third, if this CBAM is allowed by the existing WTO rules. So according to my understanding, that's actually to China, if the CBAM entered into force, it will affect only 1 or 2% of China's exportation. It's not so big a number, but the situation is not the number; it's the legal nature. Yeah. So I understand that the EU has done a lot of studies on the legality of the CBAM out of the WTO rules, but there's still some issues to be served in future. Yeah.
Maria Antonia, any comment?
I think that was very well explained.
Yeah, okay. Professor Mubiala?
Yes, Mamadou, I'm facing some problems to hear you.
Okay.
Not you, but maybe people asking question. Could
Okay.
you maybe repeat for me?
Yeah. The question was whether the carbon border adjustment mechanism was appropriate and whether it could help actually adjusting what is its role actually in the fight against climate change, because this was a point that Professor Tianbao had made in the presentation.
But I don't know what kind of mechanism we can, refer to. Maybe we already have several mechanisms, and I think that the most important thing to do is to use them, to effectively use them, because all the mechanisms, established since the adoption of the UNFCCC, convention, didn't, operate as initially, conceived. It's very important to maybe to have a break, to make an evaluation of the existing mechanism and to see how they could be themselves be adjusted in order to respond to effectively respond to this includes especially funding or financial mechanism, the green, funds and other specific funds. There are a lot of them, and it's very, very important also to see how a coordinating mechanism could be established to ensure that all these mechanisms are working in the same direction. It's very, very important, because now if you take, for example, the case of the Congo Basin, there are many initiatives, intervening in the Congo basins in order to prevent the deforestation with a view to curbing, the climate change. But my impression is that all these mechanisms are operating in a, competitive way, and not in a, in a way that could, address the challenge we are facing now. It's very important to review, to have a review of all the existing mechanisms, in particular financial mechanisms, and to ensure that they could coordinate better among them. That could be a thing that there is no way, no need to establish new mechanisms. The existing mechanisms are, well conceived. The need is to ensure that they effectively operate and in the same direction in order to address the challenge of climate change.
Yeah, but I agree with I agree with you. But how do we deal with the fact that even when developing countries are polluting the climate, they are doing it to produce goods for the West to be able to enjoy them? Because that's the problem that Professor Quinn is really raising. So. Yeah.
You are talking to me?
Yeah, I was talking to you actually, because he made
Yes.
the point that even when we look at the emission of developing countries, in some cases, those emissions are due to the fact that they are producing goods that are to be used by Western countries. So it poses a problem. It poses a problem on two aspects. The first one is, shouldn't we move rather to the direction of limiting our consumption? that's really one point that is fundamental, and that needs that we need to add to the discussion. But the other question also, the other point, the other side of the story is that developing countries are not obliged to produce those goods. So I'm not sure how you will take the two sides of the story. So let's start with Professor Tianbao. Yeah. We are not obliged to produce these goods, so we could stop.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I was saying, because you made the point that
Oui.
yes.
Un instant.
No, so yeah. So I was making the point that even if developing countries are polluting the climate to produce goods for the West, we are not obliged to do that. Are we? We could stop. So
yes,
that would be yeah. So how do you respond to that argument?
Oh, yes. So it's stop producing,
yeah.
Stop production and stop exportation is kind of a solution for that.
Yeah.
But it's not the best one, because we indeed in practice we have already kind of allocation of a market. So as most of the developing countries kind of producers of lots of goods. So the best way for me, I think, is to provide the advanced technologies, to provide kind of financial assistance to help the developing countries to have a kind of a green development, to produce in a more energy and resources efficient way. So this kind of is kind of a solidarity obligation for the developed countries, and this kind of obligations should be incorporated into the current international climate change law.
But then it really triggers the other question that I will ask to all three panelists. Why is it that, because we have been hearing this thing about cooperation, financial assistance, and transfer of technology since the Rio Declaration, it has already been there. But why isn't it working? Perhaps I will then start with Maria. Why are we talking about it for so long and without seeing any result, concrete result in hard law? Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I think it depends a lot on the political moment. I think it's, multilateralism it's been harder to achieve. And, we saw how many years it took to actually get to the Paris Agreement, for example, which is sort of the latest big agreement that we have at the international level. And I think with COVID-19, at first people thought that you would sort of bring multilateralism back, but it wasn't really what happened. So I think, overall, we've been finding sort of alternative solutions to this, and we don't necessarily need hard law to actually make things enforceable. So you can see, from the Paris Agreement that a lot of these commitments are voluntary. And yes, we haven't exactly reached where we need to, but there's been a lot of progress in the past few years. And I think that shouldn't be forgotten just because, we haven't really reached where we're supposed to. It's a very big world. There are several things at stake. And I think, we do need an answer fast, but we're getting there. I want to be optimistic about it.
So, Professor Tianbao.
So, of course, this is a long question in climate change fields. I'd like to give another example about the biodiversity, CBD, in the context of CBD. In the past, in the last October in Kunming in China, China's President Xi Jinping declared about 1.5 billion Chinese yuan as kind of a biodiversity fund to support the conservation of biodiversity of developing countries. So this means we heard about a lot of promises from the developed countries, but they haven't, many of them, we cannot say all of them, many of them is kind of, they have not practiced their promises. So that's the problem. So they have a lot of criticisms on developing countries, say China did not so good, Brazil did not so good, and India and South Africa, something like that. But it's joint venture. So we all have the common responsibilities. Yes, we have a common responsibilities, but we do need help. If you want to help this all, we are all in one ship. Right? If you want us to join in the cause to combat the climate change, you should help the developing countries to do something. You cannot ask them just do something but without any financial and technologies. So I think that is a very simple fact. They say very strongly, and they promised very openly or very, but we see very few, I mean, the practice, we see very few result. And that's a pity, you know. I think China give a very good example for the developed countries in biodiversity fund.
Professor Mubiala, so what are your views on this question of financial assistance and transfer of technology?
It's about the soft and hard law. Mamadou?
No, yes, the question, where do we stand with respect to financial assistance and transfer of technology in the fight against climate change? Because that's really one of the points that was put forward by the developing countries in order to be able to...
Of course, I think that that is the core issue between the North and the South. And you know yourself, that's not the first time in international relations that we have, you know, a conflict regarding these issues. You know, financial aid or development aid, and also, you know, technology transfer of technology. I think that that's, you know, a new case, because if we know since the debate on the new economic order, new world, you know, economic international order, there has been an opposition between, you know, developed and developing countries regarding, you know, the implementation of their own commitment, because these countries, the developed countries themselves, committed themselves to make this transfer. And as you know, the developing countries have also the need to develop themselves, and they can't take custodial measures or strategies, for example, by you know, conserving forests instead of you know, using them, because their own people have also a right to development. But when the West or the developed countries in general commit, you know, to ensure that they will do some things in exchange to the goodwill of developing countries, you know, which also by taking measures to, you know, to conserve, you know, this forest, have also, you know, lost opportunities for development of the people. And there is somewhere something, you know, like, you know, a kind of discrimination or injustice between, developed countries and developing countries. Developing countries didn't contribute to the level of the climate change we are facing. The main cause of the climate change, as we know, it is the conception of development implemented by the developed countries since at least the last century. But now they have to pay for that. If they don't want to pay, the only solution for developing countries will be to take the same way of industrializations, and then therefore I think that
but we will all die,
the world
Professor
will be exposed
Mubiala.
To its destruction, total destruction, or to its end. I think that there is something to do. We have to negotiate and to see that they have legal obligations. It is not a moral obligation. It's not a moral responsibility. Because they have destroyed the world, and now they have to pay for that. I think that is very important that these kind of negotiations take into account the responsibilities of these countries and not like something we are doing with developed countries, like we did with them when there was the rhetoric of the development aid. This is not the case. We are now in a system where there is a responsibility, there is, a responsibility, a compensation to be done by these countries. I can, stop there.
Yeah. Of course, I understand that we won't come to a definitive answer on this issue today, because it's one of the most complex one and one of the most difficult one in the ongoing negotiation. Perhaps before closing, I would like to take up one point that was made by Maria Antonia, which relates to the climate change litigation. Because we have heard and saw all the development that are taking place in Latin America. And I want to know how is it going in other regions? I know, for instance, that in the African Charter on Human and People Rights, people and individuals have a right to a clean environment. So do we see climate change litigation in those regions also as a possible solution in order to prompt governments to commit more to their obligation? So here I will start with Professor Tianbao.
Climate litigation is a very broad concept.
In domestic law.
Yeah, according to my understanding, or we all know that the Columbia Law School has a lot of cases in the United States and in other countries, but different countries have different understanding about the climate litigation. So at least in China, we have already some kind of climate litigation. For example, this now China has opened its the national ETS market. So there are some cases related to the registration and the clearing and the trading of the emission quotas or CCERs, something like that. So this could be regarded as the traditional business litigation. You can also regard this as kind of climate litigation because it's related to the emission treaties in the context of climate change. But there are also some the cases with, for example, with some of the renewable resources case. So the plaintiff to claim that the generators should use, or the grid, actually the state grid should use more electricity generated from this the renewable energies consumption, something like that. So I think it's the litigation. Litigation is kind of end of the pipe solution. So it's very important, but also someone told us that the litigation has a kind of a preventive function. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, but mostly or basically litigation is end of pipe solution. So we have the legislative, administrative, or the source control and the process control. That is the end of the pipe control. So litigation can play very good, very important role, but not comprehensive way, you know. So we will see a lot. We will see more environmental or climate litigations in China in near future, I believe. Yeah.
Professor Mubiala, you have the floor on this question of litigation, and yeah.
I think that it's a good way to see, to explore, in order to ensure the climate justice. But I don't, you know yourself that until now, so far, there are only in 2 countries, I think the Netherlands, where you are, and maybe in Germany, we have some decisions, you know, some court decision regarding the issues, the claims linked to climate change. I don't know if Western jurisdiction or court will be more progressist than their own state to ensure that they can contribute also by, you know, condemning their own countries to pay or to compensate damages caused or the prejudice caused by the activities in terms. But it's something to explore more, maybe also to think about at the international level to see if, you know, the International Court of Justice and other, you know, regional jurisdiction could also be, you know, the ways to go. They can, you know, the adjudication could play as, you know, a catalyst in order to ensure that states or especially developed countries can, you know, implement the commitment in this field. It's very important. It's one of the ways it's complementary to the policy, the advocacy, to the diplomacy, and other. It could be complements the ways, you know, we are using now in order to ensure that we can address this issue. I stop there.
Yeah, Maria Antonia, any follow-up comments on this new development that I really like? I discovered it last week and I started reading the cases and I find them fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a very fascinating, you know, new trend, and you know, it really is what I do on my day-to-day basis is now look at these cases, and there are cases popping up everywhere, really, and a lot of them in Latin America. I think the region is really sort of starting to wake up to this. You know, there were some older cases, there was one very notable in Colombia, but there have been really new cases in a lot of different countries, and it's been really exciting to see what the legal reasonings that are being proposed are, and how the courts are really addressing them. So, you know, sometimes in some regions more than others, the courts are a little more slower to respond, but it's been really exciting. And I think this is really what we're going to be discussing for the next couple of years in terms of climate governance. So.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much to all the speakers for attending today's session. We are already running out of time, but before I close, I would like to give you the floor for your last comments. And if you have any suggestion to make to the numerous students also that we have in the audience on where to look for as far as climate change is concerned. Yeah. So Maria Antonia, I will start with you first.
Yeah, I'll put the link here to our database so that the students can check it out. With obviously the world is really big and we try to be as comprehensive as we can, but if you have any updates that we haven't included in our database, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to talk about this, and we're really looking to be to have countries, especially in the global south, being very represented in our database. So I'll link the database in here, and I look forward to talking. If you want to reach out to me, I'll add my email as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Professor Mutoy Mubiala.
Yes, thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts with everyone. I think that for the future, it is very important to have a kind of domestication of the global climate regime, because I think that it is a global issue, but I think that the response could be local. That's the same for human rights, global instrument, but to address human rights issues, we have to act locally. I think that is very important for states, especially states from the south, the global south, to ensure the development of domestication of the climate change regime. This could have an impact because if we expect from, the COP and had global meetings, will wait for long time, for long. So it is very important that at the local level, at the regional level, we, act for domesticating the global climate change regime. That's my final words. And I thank you again for giving me the opportunity to attend this important meeting.
Thank you very much. It was really a great pleasure to have all of you. Professor Tianbao, yeah, now you have the floor. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. So international law is based on global consensus. So the lawmaking and the implementation needs the global efforts in good faith. That's my last comments. But I have a kind of a suggestion for you, for the wonderful organizer of this event. So according to my understanding, there are many events on climate change, even climate change law at the international level. But a few of them focus on the perspective of developing countries.
Yeah.
So you are one of the earliest realizer the organizer to do that. So perhaps it's only the beginning or start of this this process. And I thought that you can organize more similar events, or maybe you can initiate a kind of a global research project. We can do something together in the future. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I really like that idea of a global South united, trying to be a driving force on climate change, and we will certainly revert to you to discuss further modalities on how we could give flesh to this idea. So with this, I would like to thank all our panelists. Thank you very much for the sacrifice of your time, for your ideas, and for the great discussion. I would also like to thank all the audience. And yes, so we should be looking forward to the next event. Thank you very much. And have a very good evening, good day,
Thank
wherever
you.
you are.
You are
Thank you.
welcome.
Thank you for the invitation. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Good night. Bye.
Bye.